but I noticed that like you don't really have any like opening beginning. You just sort of like you start right in the middle of a conversation, kind of.
Yeah, kind of. But I'll try something like that here. So I met you a little over 10 years ago when we were involved in a journal called Critical Review, which was sort of curating a few select grad students or people hopefully on the way to grad school to come together for economic theory conference, spearheaded by this guy, Jeffrey Friedman, who was the editor of Critical Review and still is, as far as I know. So at the time, the journal was really into the question of, well, aside from the Great Recession, which happened around the time, 2008, and the causes of that crisis, it was into interrogating the whole notion of public choice theory, kind of a broadly sort of libertarian application of market ideas to the public sector, to the government. And there was some skepticism on Jeffrey Friedman's part of that being a reliable guide to determining the actions of people acting in government. He thought it was somewhat uncharitable to assume even covertly selfish motives.
Yeah, he wanted to bring some more of a political science background to some of the insights from outside of economics, because public choice theory is really economics, and he thought that those in the public choice school should be able to actually look at what people in political science departments have been doing for a long time and bring some of those insights over, I think.
Yeah. And one of those things
Critical Review kind of brings together, it's kind of it's what do you call it, I'm blanking on the word, but like bringing people from different departments and schools and everything together.
Yeah, what's the term?
Multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary.
Yeah.
Just looking for.
I almost said interpersonal. No, that's not.
Yeah.
But yeah, so and one of those things that he was trying to bring in from political science was extensive surveys looking at what people claim is their actual reason for acting a certain way. So I remember the journal showing that people in general, voters, that is, not the elite political actors, but acting in a kind of pro-social or sociotropic way, in that they're not voting for out of their own personal interest as far as any kind of crude, certainly monetary self-interest, but they're by all accounts acting in a way that they believe is good for the country, people that aren't them. And so Jeffrey Friedman was basically being charitable enough to apply that to the actions of politicians as well, which I think people thought was
naive.
Naive. Yeah, somewhat naive. There's reason to think that they're not, because of the kind of incentives they face and the kind of opportunities that present themselves to kind of elite political actors. They have to be acting more selfishly than it appears, right?
Yeah.
Whereas a voter, they would have the same reason to suspect that they're actually acting in a covertly selfish way.
Yeah.
Take them at face value.
But public choice theory isn't just looking at politicians. If we were just looking at politicians, I would say absolutely, almost all of them, unfortunately, have a lot of selfish motive. Some of them have only selfish motive, it seems, these days. And I could say which party I see that more in. But that's just politicians, right? And it takes a certain type of person to go into politics and do well, unfortunately. And sometimes they are pure of heart. And I can think of a few. But a lot of them go into it, and the easiest way to do well is by being selfish. But that's just politicians. Unfortunately, public choice theory looks at government officials, at what they tend to refer to as bureaucrats. And they assume that bureaucrats, or you could call them civil servants, are working only in their own interest or their own department's interest, or to maximize their budget and that sort of thing. And that's where I think public choice theory is probably quite wrong, especially if you apply it, universally around. Because think about, the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK. Do you really think all of those doctors and nurses and even all of those administrators and everyone that works there is really just interested in their own personal budget and their own self-interest? Because that's just not the case at all. And that's one big government department.
See, what I think as you move up the the chain of personnel, the kind of pecking order within those institutions, you'll see action that looks selfish in the sense that they're trying to kind of procure resources for themselves. But isn't that just sort of still remains a proxy for the institution doing good in a more kind of altruistic way? Like I liken it to, maybe it's a bad metaphor, but a parent and a child on an airplane, and the parent puts on their mask first in order to make sure that they can do right by the child. So it might just look like kind of a Machiavellian selfish strategy. Let's say if you're top of one of these organizations, but you're really you are actually helping to perpetuate itself, which is required before you can keep perpetuating something like some generic sense of public health, right?
No, it's definitely true. They may want to procure more resources for their for their department or for what they're doing because they feel they need them, and I think that's reasonable. But if you assume that affects everything they do in a certain way, you may fall afoul because, for example, they're not going to necessarily lie about their costs and other things, which they could do if they were trying to be purely selfish and just maximize all the resources. But they care about the rest of the NHS as well, and they don't want to give false data to the rest of the NHS. So they're not going to lie. And they're not going to do other things that people might do in other circumstances if they were being purely selfish. But they actually care about the whole institution as well as their own department.
Yeah. So what is your view on the the state of economics since about 10 years ago when we were involved in critical review? I mean, there's a lot of areas you could approach from that angle.
Yeah. I mean, for that particular question, I'm not probably the best person to ask because I've always been a bit of a niche, economist. I don't always know the lay of the land of all of economics. And in the last 10 years, I guess I didn't stick with the academic side that, completely. For the last few years, I haven't been that deeply involved in the academic side, except for going to conferences and stuff. I've written several books criticizing Austrian economics. Basically, as you might recall, I got into economics through George Mason and the kind of, the Austrian side of economics. And I was very taken with it. I had been studying the Soviet economy for some years before that as a way to sort of, I wanted to understand why Marxism, why socialism, didn't work. And I studied that very deeply. And then obviously from there, I found Austrian economics and I got into it. And I really like the way that it's very dynamic and, not just a simple mathematical models and stuff. So I got very much into Austrian economics. But then eventually I sort of came out the other side thinking that they also, are missing a lot of important things, particularly, all economists kind of miss some of the things that exist outside of economics that affect economics and that affect the outcome of their models, the way that they want to interpret, the way that they want to interpret whether someone is selfish or not and what their reasonings are, things like that. And also, the way that they would interpret, the importance of markets. If you only look at economics things, then you're going to see markets in a different way than if you can take other things into account. And I'm not saying anyone is perfect or any, particular school could look at everything and take everything into account. But there are specific things that I think Austrian economists have done wrong. And so I spent a long time sort of critiquing that and coming up with a sort of a post-Austrian approach. But I don't know that much about, I've gone to conferences and things like that, but they're usually heterodox conferences and everything. So I don't really follow all the mainstream stuff or know really what's going on in economics lately from a broader view.
Yeah.
Have you been following
it? Not terribly. I mean, I know. Okay, so I know that the influence of evolutionary psychology has kind of, I think, has moved further within scope of economics and the kind of things they discuss and look at.
Yeah.
I know that so behavioral econ was a really big deal about 10 years ago.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and that sort of
ties in a bit with EvPsych.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's how it's been going for a little while now. That it's kind of like it's tweaking at the edges of the neoclassical kind of thing with things like behavioral economics, which is very interesting, and it definitely adds something. And then people have continued to sort of extend those kinds of insights, adding in other fields like psychology and so on. You know, I mean, behavioral economics is already obviously going to involve psychology, but they get sort of more deeply into it with more psychology and even neurosciences and stuff like that. There's a lot of experimental economics that look at, you know, even using neuroscience techniques and stuff, you know, how the brain actually is affected by things and stuff like that. So there's no whole field of neuroeconomics. And I think that, yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I just don't follow it that closely. And I think it's all very interesting, but I'm not sure that it has like fundamentally changed the kinds of wrong-headed approaches that a lot of economists are still taking. But it's interesting. And I think, you know, I think the fundamental, my issue, I have a big issue with libertarianism right now and Austrian economics.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly libertarianism.
Friedman, part of the reason Jeffrey Friedman has been so kind of well, he's ensconced in his ivory tower and he seems to like it that way. I talked about a year ago, and he said that everything happening now, it feels as if like just some sort of confluence of current events and the culture war is subsuming everything. So the conversation, I mean, where it meets the public, it was never particularly high-minded or abstract, but it's gotten so much worse. Like these kind of 90s arguments about the size and scope of government look just quaint and positive. So, and that's part of why he just does not want to join the fray in any way, because of a lot of what's happening under the banner of libertarianism. You know.
Yeah, I know, but you shouldn't just hide from it. I mean, I think if there are libertarians who can see how foolish a lot of the arguments are that are coming from people who are claiming to be coming from a libertarian perspective, or at least using libertarian justifications. If the people who are truly libertarian but don't, you know, believe those things can actually come out and say something, you know, that could potentially help, just at the edges at least, you know, help fewer, you know, because every day, like, new people will hear these arguments and potentially believe them. And so, you know, if you can prevent one person from falling afoul of a ridiculous argument, then you've done something good. So I'm frustrated at how few of the, you know, like a lot of the libertarians that I know and trust, you know, could see what was happening with Trump and didn't align themselves with it and even spoke out against it a little. But, you know, not as early or as often as I would have liked to see. And then there were people who claimed to be libertarians that stuck with Trump the whole time. And it's just, I find it just disgusting. And
the term libertarian is actually kind of in disrepute now. A lot of the newer right, they think that everything that came before Trump was just arch libertarianism. They think that, you know, every Republican Party that put, like, you know, just elite economics first, elite economic interests and arguments first, rather than kind of going to where the people wanted to go, which is much more culture war oriented. They don't want to hear about privatization of Social Security and all that kind of thing. So, you know, to the degree that libertarian,
it was more libertarian than now. I mean, it wasn't, you know, you can say what you like, but I mean, there was the compassionate conservative thing, and there was big warmongering things. I mean, it wasn't libertarian in any sense that, for example, a left libertarian would recognize. But there was more of a focus on the economic side of libertarian things. So for a right libertarian, as it were, there was a lot more of that, and because at least there, you know, people weren't just only thinking in culture war terms.
It's really kind of amazing. I mean, I think about these, you know, think tanks I was involved in as a student, and that really is an entirely top-down project. You know, if you put that all to the people, none of what we covered is what they'd want to talk about. It really was overwhelmingly donor-driven, and there's a kind of Vulcan approach to it all that just doesn't really mesh with how real people's sensibilities. So, You know, now of course I came to that organically. You know, it wasn't foisted upon me. But so I went where a small strata of society and a kind of a right-aligned nerd strata of society was already at. So, but that everything seems to have gotten away from that now. That if the populace had their druthers, it would just be one media directed, not directed, but media influenced event after another. I don't know. Some attempt to string all of this endless supply of events, some way to string it all together so that you're consistent in your approach in each one would be ideological. But I feel like right now it's just there's too much happening to get a fix on what that ideology would be. And so you just end up getting a kind of a collection of sentiments and likely approaches that look like it has a political orientation, but you can't rationally explain all of it. So before this this world of kind of current events dominated mood affiliation, as Tyler Cowen would say, there was something like an approach to being consistent and ideological. I think in both parties, and on both sides, if we're being a little Manichean. But that's just been shattered lately, and I'm having a hard time kind of staying above it all and trying to.
Yeah, well, the way it seems to be shaking out, the alignments seem to be shaking out right now is that sort of the Democrats or the people on the left are moving a little more progressive and wanting to base things in science and fact. So they want to address global warming. They want to address all of these things that they believe science and fact support, including help for the poor and healthcare and things like that. Now, libertarians may not like that stuff, but it is based on.
Talking about the UK or the US, because I push back on some of that. I mean, global warming, I think, is probably the strongest, but on so many other fronts, they do not seem particularly science influenced. When it comes to race or gender relations, they are.
I'm not talking about race or gender relations, am I? What I just said was about trying to, I'm talking about like what's actually happening in Congress right now, which is that the infrastructure bill, the COVID bill, these kinds of things are like are just basic practical things that are there to address a pandemic and then to address the failing infrastructure. These are the big projects, the billions and trillions going into them that they're working on right now. Whatever they might be doing on the edges about bathrooms is really trivial stuff. That's not, no money is going into that. No effort is going into that. That's really not what's happening right now.
Okay, so on the question of the pandemic, the U.S. feels like multiple countries under one banner, all approaching it in kind of different ways. So I live in California, where it's pretty heavily pro lockdown, not England level. I know it's particularly aggressive there, but Florida is taking a completely different approach. Now, as far as what the science,
England is pretty much finished with lockdown. I mean, the pubs are open and all of that.
Yeah. So I mean, can we look back now on that's actually a good question. At what point do we know we should look back and say, okay, we have enough evidence now to know that this was the right approach in this state, this was the wrong approach in another state? It seems like the numbers have just been all over the place, and there's no clear pattern that California did better than Florida or something. I mean, are you seeing something else?
I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I also don't know how much travel there's been between them. I mean, has there been have all the interstate highways been shut down, or were people still traveling back and forth?
Oh yeah, they're traveling back and forth. I know in the Northeast.
So you're not really going to get good data because someone's going to bring COVID from Florida to California, and whatever California did, is going to not matter. And I mean, like Trump was having rallies all across the entire country, all the way up until, pretty much until the vaccine was there. So the whole, the entire time until the vaccine came out was a mess in terms of bringing, having little COVID parties all over the place. So I don't think there's ever going to be any good data.
Yeah, see, in the blue cities,
you can look at different countries and see how well they did. And those who did a quick, short lockdown at the beginning, like caught it right away and did a lockdown immediately, have done the best by far.
Yeah.
And there's enough data country to country to be able to say that already a long time ago. I mean, that was pretty clear. months and months ago.
Yeah, the blue city or blue state equivalent of the Trump rallies were the impromptu like BLM protests and things where a lot of people came together with obviously, not wearing masks, not doing social distancing, and I don't think they did any better or worse than the red states where people are going to Trump rallies. It's just kind of.
Well, yeah, I mean the outdoor protests, even when people were wearing masks, would have still been super spreader events to some extent. The indoor Trump rallies where no one was wearing masks were definitely worse, but both of them were super spreader events. And as I say, you also just had you had people ignoring the rules all over the place, and you had people traveling state to state. So it's just too messy. I don't think you're ever going to have really good state to state data.
And that actually gets to this question of science versus fact. Or no, it's science and facts versus values, right? I don't. The kind of scientific facts that become available to us is sitting on top of a bed of values that determine what kind of experiments we'll even see. So the fact that we can't clearly lock down one state from another, really not willing to go there to get a nice clean control group or control experiment to see what's happening with the virus. That's because of certain values of individual autonomy and freedom and all of that, which I think even most of Western Europe is largely on board with. I mean, they're willing to take somewhat more extreme measures, but there's still more similarity there, right?
Yeah.
To say China, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't. It's hard to say where values end and science begins. So, yeah.
Well, sure. You can only do the science that your values allow you to, and you have to take a grain of salt, with if your values are important, then even if the science tells you to do X, you may not be able to do X. You might say, well, that's very nice, but I can only do X plus 1 or something a little different because my values won't allow me to do something like lock down all the interstate highways, but that doesn't mean that you can't achieve the results, potentially, especially if you're willing to suspend your values for a very short time, in the case of a pandemic, because the countries that, like New Zealand, who shares all the same values as the UK and the US and Western Europe, and there's obviously they have much easier time of it because they're more spread out. There's like very few people across the whole country and stuff. But they said, for 2 weeks, we're suspending all of our, freedoms, and we're just going to lock down as hardcore as possible. And then they basically didn't have a pandemic. They caught the few cases, but they had a much easier, it was much easier for them to do. But they were also willing to suspend those values.
Even more than Australia is, right?
Sorry?
I said New Zealand is geographically isolated.
Yeah.
It's like two large islands and a few smaller ones. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. But they did have, people coming in with the pandemic. They did have to do it. They did have to take care of it, and they did have to take harsh actions at the beginning to make sure that, they hadn't been worse. They hadn't been infected by more people. They had to track down every single person who had it, isolate them. They all had to lose their liberties for a while they did that. Now, I'm not, even if everyone in America had been willing to do that, I don't think it probably could have worked. But we're talking about the very beginning of the pandemic. So like when the first people came into America, if they had immediately said, okay, lock down all the airports, find all those people, and did that right at the beginning, it's possible it could have worked. It might not have worked, but no one was willing to do that. And no one was willing to do that in the UK, and no one was willing to do that in a lot of places. But those countries where they did do that got rid of the pandemic was over within like a month. And then they might have had a second resurgence, which they also got done with within a month. You know?
I've seen a lot of skepticism by people, I guess largely on the right or right aligned, that China, skepticism that China was able to take control of this in a successful way because they think that China's just lying. That
it's just very possible.
As bad there as anywhere else, and that they're lying.
I think it was probably much worse in China than they admitted to.
Yeah.
But Taiwan did a good job, and I believe them.
Oh, Taiwan?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a little dismayed by South Korea and Japan. They seem to be experiencing something pretty bad right now. Well, Japan, I don't know about South Korea, but Japan
Yeah, I
is
think South Korea did well too, but I haven't actually looked at a lot of this very recently, so I could be wrong. They could have had a new resurgence that I hadn't heard of.
Yeah, and India now is experiencing a
yeah, I heard that. That sounds really bad. That sounds really bad.
Yeah, so this gets back to that point about at what point can we say this these various social experiments are over and we can compare and contrast one country. We never quite know when it's finished, right?
Well, we'll know when it's finished when everybody has, when it's like 80-90% immunity from vaccinations and stuff, and then it's pretty much over, right? And so then we can start comparing data.
The rationale for success or failure, at least here in California, it seems to keep changing, and they're not making it clear when they've moved from one rationale to another. So at first it was so-called flattening the curve, making sure the hospitals weren't overwhelmed. And now that doesn't seem to be the problem, and instead it's percentage of people who've been vaccinated. And I think
flattening the curve was always just a first step. That was clear when we talked about it. That was always just a first step. It's like we got to flatten the curve, to prepare for when we can vaccinate. To get it under. That was getting it under control. A first step. And most places achieved that. A lot of places achieved that. But then that's you still have a virus, right? So that's still, you're not done. You've just got it under control.
Yeah.
In England, the thing is usually when it's what it was for a long time, they didn't call it flattening the curve, but they called it getting the rate under 1, so that it's basically like each person that has it passes it to fewer people, to less than so that it's not continuing to expand the numbers of people getting infected. So it's another way of saying getting it under control. First, it was flattening the curve so that there wasn't the NHS wasn't overwhelmed, but the NHS here is really well coordinated, so that wasn't really a problem. There was never really a problem with the NHS, but then it was getting the what is